Well, and with that, we move on to our next session, which is holistic response to animal welfare, climate change, and biodiversity. This session is being moderated by Sarita Joshi, who is a campaign coordinator. She works at the Federation of Indian Animal Protection Organizations, or FIAPO, in the capacity, as I said, of a campaign coordinator for the Human Behavior Change Program. Very interesting indeed. Her role is to carry out planning, coordination, and implementation of digital and on ground public outreach projects that lead to creating awareness about rights of farmed animals and impacting dietary behavior change amongst the Indian masses. Sarita, thank you so much today for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for such kind and big words. I am glad and honored to be able to moderate this session with Mr. Jesse Kharbanda. We have this very wonderful session on holistic response to animal welfare, climate change, and biodiversity. And the speaker doesn't need much introduction because his work really speaks volumes for what he's done in Indiana. And I'd introduce Mr. Jesse Kharbanda. He leads the US state of Indiana's largest environmental policy organization called Hoosier Environmental Council, which works to reduce pollution, including the factory farming, protecting of land, water, and wildlife, and to find advanced climate solutions. Jesse's honors include being named under two 40 under 40 lists and winning a Holman Health Award for public policy advocacy. Jesse has a graduate degree from Oxford University and undergraduate degrees from University of Chicago. His research theses were all focused in South Asia, and his family hails from India. Jesse, over to you for this wonderful presentation that you'll take us through.
Well, let me begin with a few thank yous. Thank you, Sarita, for the kind introduction. Thank you, FIAPO and Asia for Animals, for the honor of presenting to you all. Thank you to my good friend, a kind friend, Jessica Ava, for recommending me for this opportunity. And thank you to each and every one of you for the compassion and kindness and resilience you show in protecting so many animals and saving so many animal lives. I am truly grateful to all of you. The title of my talk is Addressing a Trio of Crises by Focusing on the Factory Farm Problem. Here's an outline of what I'll be covering with you all. And a note that I will be using the term factory farming, although I realize that there are many other terms to characterize this issue. A little bit about my personal and professional background. I have deep roots in South Asia. My grandparents were all born in present-day Pakistan. They were refugees to the Indian side during the partition in 1947, which is where both of my parents were born. I have many relatives across India, and I have deep academic and professional relationships to India. I was born and raised in the United States, in the Midwest in particular, which is known as the breadbasket of America. It is also the industrial powerhouse of the United States. And I want to specifically focus on Indiana, which is where I have lived for the last 13 years. And I reside in the capital, Indianapolis, which is about 120 miles southeast of Chicago, which I'm sure every one of you is familiar with. The NGO that I lead is called the Hoosier Environmental Council. It is Indiana's largest environmental public policy organization, and we work to try to achieve broad-based change in Indiana through education, technical assistance, and public policy advocacy. What makes this relatively rare in the United States is that we have a special focus on factory farming. I want to spend some time getting our minds focused on the three crises of animal abuse, biodiversity loss, and climate change. Each of them are enormous problems, as we all know. Animal abuse takes many different forms. All types of animals are exploited, as we know, in the context of factory farming, wildlife, companion animals, and animals that are confined in laboratories. So many dimensions of animal abuse, such a profound problem on its own. Then there's the issue of biodiversity loss. We have seen a 60% decline in wildlife populations across the world over the last 50 years, a profound, alarming, deeply, deeply disturbing trend that must be reversed. And finally, there is climate change. We face a situation where carbon dioxide levels are the highest that they've been in 23 million years. 23 million years. So each of these problems are gigantic, but my contention is that if we can make progress on these three challenges: animal abuse, biodiversity loss, and the climate crisis, which we may see as distinct problems if we focus our energies on shifting our societies away from factory farming. These are interconnected problems. So let's talk about the significance of factory farming for these three crises. And let's focus briefly on Indiana, which I know best. The population of the state is about 6.6 million, and yet there is so much livestock in Indiana that it produces waste equivalent to 87 million people. That's how many we have. That's how profound the impact of livestock is in Indiana. And why is it the case? On many different metrics, we are near the top in America in factory farming. To give you two examples, we are third in the United States in egg-laying hens. We are fifth in the United States in pigs. Now, we also know that factory farming is a major source of animal abuse in the United States context because, as you can see from this diagram, the overwhelming number of animals that are killed in America, which are in the billions, are farm animals, those who die in factory farms, whether that is primarily in slaughterhouses associated with factory farms. We also know that factory farming is a top threat to river and Gulf biodiversity. The case in point is that Indiana's government itself has noted that the number one source of water pollution in Indiana is from factory farming. And furthermore, the manure runoff from factory farms end up making it into the mighty Mississippi River, the enormous river in the United States, and that ultimately contaminates an ocean-like area called the Gulf of Mexico and has created a dead zone. That's attributed to a few different factors, but the largest factor is industrial agriculture, both crop agriculture and most certainly factory farm agriculture. And then finally, factory farms are a major greenhouse gas emitter. This is an example on your left of the size of these manure pits that are associated with these factory farms. They can be acres in size. And as you can see, they are open air. And that means they are emitting methane, which, as we all know, is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So I hope I've made the case that factory farming is driving animal abuse, biodiversity loss, and the issue of climate change in the American context. But I contend that in Indiana, in India, and in Asia overall, we have every reason to be concerned that factory farming could be a growing driver of these three crises in the context of India and Asia. We all know that animal abuse is a problem in Asia, and this is an example of one of the practices that can be found on factory farming in India, which is dehorning in an incredibly cruel way, where part of the horn is burned off on this beautiful cow, and then the remainder of the horn is literally gouged out by something like a plier. So animal abuse is no doubt reflected in the factory farming context in India. Secondly, there is a serious biodiversity aspect to factory farming in India that may not be necessarily evident. But to me, the case in point is in the tannery industry in India. The city of Kanpur in northern India has 300 tanneries alone. And those tanneries only exist where leather begins to be made because of India's very large dairy industry, where at some point old cows get sold into the beef industry or sold into the leather industry, and their hides are used, of course, in the making of leather. And the tannery process can be very toxic. It can emit an array of effluents, and then those effluents make their way into rivers. And the Ganges River, the sacred Ganges River of India, is contaminated in part because of all the toxins that come from the tanneries that dot the Ganges River. And this has implications for biodiversity because of the tremendous amount of aquatic life that once thrived in the Ganges River, but now is becoming endangered or in some parts extinct. Case in point is the Ganges River dolphin, which in large segments of the Ganges River is extinct. And like I said, is an endangered species. And I think that the Ganges River dolphin, again, is emblematic of the fact that because India is seeing a growing livestock sector, a growing factory farm sector, it is going to face a growing threat to its biodiversity for exactly the same mechanisms that happen in America, which is that these factory farms are located near rivers. They contaminate these rivers with various pollutants that can be found in manure, and that ultimately kills wildlife and reduces biodiversity. And even though factory farming is not nearly as prevalent in India and Asia as it is in the United States, there is factory farming there. And here's a manure pit in Punjab, which happens to be, again, the area that my parents grew up, and it is emitting methane. And once again, as factory farming grows in India, we're going to see more of these manure pits. They're likely to be, without policy action, uncovered, which means that they are emitting large amounts of methane into the atmosphere. Now, while there are many great vegan activists across Asia, including ones who are tuning in to the Asia for Animals conference, my perception is that in the short run, the factory farm problem is only going to grow in the continent. Now, why is that the case? Well, this is a very powerful reason, which is that the middle class is growing across Asia. And between India and China alone, there could be as many as 1.5 billion people in the middle class by the end of this decade. Now, the pandemic is certainly affecting things, but there's no doubt a positive trend line to a growing middle class. And we know from research from economists that there's a high correlation between income, per capita income, and meat consumption. And this is panning out in the data. Look at this very significant rise in milk production in India. And part of that milk production is being fulfilled by factory farms. This is an image, this is a photo of a factory farm in the western India state of Maharashtra, an enormous factory farm that was covered by one of the big business channels in India. We're also seeing a rise in the leather market in India. And that's partly because, again, of the rise in the dairy industry and the fact that the cows that are sourcing the leather industry are coming ultimately, oftentimes, from the dairy industry. Egg consumption has gone up significantly. And once again, part of that demand is being fulfilled by factory farms. This is a photo of a factory farm in West Bengal, the eastern state in India, one of the eastern states in India. The other thing about it is factory farming can be found in every corner of India. I'm not saying that that's the nature of the livestock sector in India overall, but that is the trend. You can find it in Punjab, in Maharashtra, in Tamil Nadu in the south, in Andhra Pradesh in the south, in Bihar, and West Bengal in the east. And there's not just the issue of scale, that the factory farm industry is growing in India and in Asia, But there's also the issue of the enforcement of laws, that you can have good laws in the books about holding polluters accountable, but do you have the number of inspectors? Do you have the number of courts to actually hold these polluters accountable for the factory farm pollution that they're causing? And if you don't, and my perception is that there's a real enforcement problem in Asia, then you're going to see, again, the prevalence of these trio of crises: animal abuse, biodiversity loss, and climate change that is attributable to factory farming. So if you're convinced that factory farming is a growing risk to India and Asia, what does one do? Well, I want to share some holistic solutions for your consideration. Big picture wise, I think in the short run, what we need to do is reduce animal and environmental harm in the here and now. And in the long run, I think our only answer is that we need to end the system of factory farming. We need to end the system. Now, I want to share some lessons from Indiana, the state in which I live, the state that has such a serious factory farming issue, and want to propose some ideas from a political, economic, legal, and social perspective. And let me express profound appreciation for the talented dedication across Asia from national NGOs, state and local NGOs, and provincial NGOs, individual activists, including law and conservation students. I also recognize that there is great variation in culture, law, and civil liberties. But I do want to share what I've learned from from Indiana, and hope it's beneficial to you. So from a legislative perspective, I want to put a spotlight on the issue of campaign formulation, that we need to be very careful in thinking about the question of focus versus breadth of a legislative plank. That the case for focus is that to do less is to do more. That if you have a few core agenda items, you can do them well. But I think there is a case for breadth, because if you truly want to solve these trio of crises, animal abuse, biodiversity loss, and climate change, then you need to create a sufficiently broad plank that accommodates those three issues. There's also the question of new laws versus existing laws. I have this perception that animal activists put a great emphasis on trying to advance in new laws. And I would like to advocate from the perspective of Indiana and the US that there is a case to defend existing laws and make sure that those laws are properly enforced, that we can achieve a lot of inroads through the enforcement of existing laws because it is so hard to enact new law. There's also the question of being proactive versus reactive. What we have found here in Indiana is that there needs to be more and more time spent to be reactive. And I hate to say that because, again, it doesn't sound very romantic or exciting sometimes to an activist, but sometimes what is better and more effective for animals is to protect the laws that we have than advance new ones, because protecting the laws we have can achieve important gains for animals in the short run. I think there's also the issue of the degree of comprehensiveness. I oftentimes see animal rights campaigns focused on social media, and that is an incredibly important and powerful strategy. But I think it's so important to think through all the dimensions of a campaign: the media piece, meeting with lawmakers, building broad-based coalitions that are oftentimes imaginative and unconventional. That's a special passion of mine. We also need to think about the impact of the poor, which I'm sure many of you are already doing. We need to be sensitized to the fact that there might be a short-run increase in costs, but we can find ways of not letting the poor fall further behind. And I recognize that the pandemic is making this situation even harder for the poor across Asia and certainly across the United States. I also want to emphasize the importance of coalition, that you need to build a big, broad tent to achieve broad-based change. We show this in the context of a very successful campaign to fight a proposed constitutional amendment that's called Right to Farm or Right to Harm. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it in the Q&A if there's time. In terms of legislative change, it's also important that we meet with all lawmakers, no matter how accessible or inaccessible they may be. I think that's an critical component of a campaign, and always to pursue a customized strategy. That when we meet with a lawmaker, we do a lot of preparation to understand every aspect of this elected official as best as we can, because that will make us as persuasive as we can be. I think it's also important to understand their underlying belief system, because over time, in an authentic way, we can influence their behavior by truly understanding the belief system. Now, I know that religion is a touchy topic, but I want you to be aware of an excellent website called the Interfaith Vegan Coalition. One of our colleagues in the United States, they have a great website called the Interfaith Vegan Coalition. And for every faith tradition that can be found in Asia, you will find a packet of information that quotes the religious scripture of that faith tradition that essentially makes the case for veganism from a very faith-specific perspective. Social media is incredibly important, and I'm sure it's one that is widely used across activists in Asia. But I just want to emphasize the importance of both image and message, that we need to be really careful about choosing images that have profound emotional potency. And secondly, that we are very careful in the messages that we write with elected officials that, again, reflect a great understanding of the psychology of that elected official. It's not necessarily about shaming an elected official, which may be the desire or inclination, but it's about giving them feedback. And by virtue of their being on Twitter or Facebook, they are opening themselves up to dialogue. I know that sometimes Twitter especially can be vicious, but it can also be a constructive way to build a relationship with an elected official that is based on sincere feedback. I also want to say that when we issue action alerts, we need to make sure that they are structured in such a way that they end up going to the elected official. I think sometimes action alerts are built to build lists of activists, and that's important. But I think at the end of the day, to build enduring confidence among activists, those messages should most definitely be sent directly to the elected official and be customizable, because elected officials, wherever you are in the world, are going to pay most attention to a message that truly feels customized towards them, to how they perceive things and how they, what animates them the most. A final point about legislative change is that I think we need to support organizations that source independent-minded journalists and the journalists themselves. Let me explain what I mean by that. Groups like FIAPO and Animal Equality and other Animal Equality India and other organizations do excellent work in investigations, and they need to be supported by people like you and me so that they can continue to do this very important work that forms the basis for policy reform that we need. Secondly, it's important to support journalists. And there is a growing model in the United States, perhaps it's happening in India and other parts of Asia, in which there are ways to support journalists that allow them to keep their integrity and their independence. One method is that some newspapers are becoming nonprofits, which means that you can become a member of that nonprofit organization, and that helps keep that nonprofit going, that media company going. Or there are situations where private journalists are facing tremendous financial pressures to cut staff, and so then they look to foundations to help fund their staff. That's certainly happening in Indiana. Let me talk briefly about legal change, which is three considerations. That we need to make sure that before we embark on a legal campaign, a legal action, a litigation, we need to be really hard-headed in making sure that we have carefully gauged the probability of success. We also need to think about the opportunity cost. If I put in $50,000 of resources into a lawsuit, what is the price that I pay for doing that? Is that directing that staff member towards a public policy campaign, directing that staff member towards legal analysis that critiques troubling law that would only perpetuate factory farming? We also need to think about unintended consequences, that when we might pursue a lawsuit, are we thinking through what could be the boomerang effect, what could be the downside of pursuing that litigation? We also need to think about, now let's talk about economic change. I think it's important that we formulate a holistic plank with an eye on the poor. What I mean by a holistic plank is that we're not only trying to pressure companies to change their practices with respect to animal abuse, but also with respect to the environmental harm that is done by sourcing meat from factory farms and the climate harm that is done by sourcing meat from factory farms. So we need to formulate a holistic plank. And what that means is pursuing petitions that really call on, say, McDonald's or some other fast food company in Asia to not only change their practices to reduce animal abuse in the here and now, but also make commitments to improve the environmental practices and the climate practices of the suppliers of meat to their companies. So that could take the form of making sure that the suppliers that provide the meat to McDonald's are establishing manure controls that prevents the manure from emitting air emissions into the atmosphere that create all sorts of toxic contaminants. It could mean the form of buying carbon credits through legitimate markets that reduce the carbon footprint of a company like McDonald's in India. Another form of economic change is to press development banks to not fund factory farms. And I was astonished to learn that some major chicken factory farm operations in India have received significant loans from some of the most important development banks in the world. And so I think there is a case to have pressure campaigns against development banks to not fund factory farms on grounds of animal abuse, on grounds of climate change, on grounds of biodiversity loss. This approach has worked without question in fighting the enormous harm of coal-fired electricity. In terms of social change, I'm sure that a lot of you use social media. I think oftentimes we think of celebrities as being ones that can help to share a message about doing good for animals, but I just want to emphasize the importance of ourselves being positive influencers in our own network. Here's an example from my own Facebook page, where on just before Thanksgiving, which as you probably know is a very important holiday in America and in Canada, I had posted a photo that really called on my friends to find alternatives to eating turkeys, which is a tradition in America and Canada. There's a tremendous amount of turkey birds that are killed, which is very, very tragic. And I called on my friends to find alternatives. It wasn't a message of condemnation. It was a message of encouragement, of finding alternatives, of presenting a solution in the comments section of my post. And I think it got a pretty good reception, as you can tell. So I think it's so important to think about the medium. And what I mean here is to actually consider using a short video as opposed to a photo as a way of engaging more people. Being careful about the message, that oftentimes a suggestion or an encouragement gets more traction than a condemnation or a scare tactic approach, even if we are outraged by the harm of factory farms, and then again, presenting a solution. Another thing that I think is that I really appreciate about what happens in the Indiana context, and I'm sure it's happening in many parts of Asia, is the idea of organizing group dinners to vegan restaurants. We use a particular platform called Meetup, where a bunch of people who've never met each other, but who are fellow vegans, get together at a vegan restaurant. That builds community, that builds financial support for a vegan restaurant. So for example, perhaps a bunch of people after the pandemic head over to Greener Cafe in New Delhi, which I understand is a wonderful vegan cafe. And again, they organize it using a tool like Meetup. Another way that I have found to be an incredibly important means to build support for the vegan society, the plant-based economy, is by creating an online directory of plant-based restaurants and cafes on your animal rights website. So your animal rights website may be focused on the serious harm that is done to animals in your community and campaigns to help reduce that harm, which is absolutely central to reducing animal suffering. But I think it's also important to pair that with solutions that we can pursue in the here and now, such as delicious and yummy restaurants that you can be found in your area. So maybe putting a directory on your animal rights website. Another idea for social change is to forge partnerships and sponsorships with plant-based businesses. What we see happening in America is that big meat companies are increasingly trying to become a more prominent presence in communities to build support for these companies and ultimately build support for factory farms. Well, why can't we do the same with plant-based businesses? Well, we're partnering with one small company in Indiana that makes plant-based delicious treats, cookies, vegan cookies. And it is a win-win situation where we're helping to promote their company to our tens of thousands of supporters on social media. And they, in turn, are providing us a portion of their profits for these vegan cookies that they sell. So forging partnerships and sponsorships with plant-based businesses. Finally, I would recommend the idea of writing letters to the editor and editorials and petitions with a mindfulness of how our work can benefit the poor. Because I think wherever you are across the world, I think there is a worry that making this transition from a meat economy to the plant-based economy will somehow hurt the poor. And I think we need to emphasize that the plant-based economy represents new jobs. It represents honoring food heritage, whatever part of Asia you might be from or whatever part of the world you might be from. And it is about more affordable food because, of course, a plant-based diet is less expensive than a meat diet, whether that is in terms of the cost of actually getting a meal or making a meal or the reduced costs in terms of better health that comes from a plant-based diet. So I want to end by saying that I truly, truly understand that this is a long journey. So we ought to embrace the attitude that sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. And we need to celebrate the small wins. And believe me, in Indiana, we face a tremendous amount of adversity and we celebrate those small wins. We are getting towards a change and a paradigm shift in our state. And at the very least, we can say, okay, I've launched this campaign. It was not successful, but I'm going to make a heartfelt, self-reflective effort to learn from that campaign and get better. I want to end with a quote that is apparently attributed to Buddha that says, "Be kind to all creatures. This is the true religion." So thank you very much once again to FIAPO and to AfA for Animals for this great opportunity, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Pitch in the first one that says, how do we tackle, you were talking about this here. How do we tackle the question of livelihood disruption for the marginal communities when seeking such legislative changes? Because a lot depends on small scale animal farming also in Asia.
That's an excellent question, Sarita, and again, it's such an honor to be with you all today. And one very quick technical correction, by the way, to my presentation, which is I had mentioned that both my parents were born in Punjab, India. My mother was born in Punjab, India. My father was born in present-day Pakistan, moved at the year of one to India. But anyway, to the excellent question, yes, I mean, I think part of the idea is to focus public policy on those larger scale factory farm operations. And there's a real climate and environmental reason beyond the issue of protecting the marginalized communities to focus on those larger operations. And it has to do with the fact that when you've got so much waste consolidated in these manure dumps, these manure pits that can be acres in size, that means they are enormous carbon risks to the atmosphere because there's so much methane that could potentially be emitted into the atmosphere. And of course, methane is so much more powerful than carbon dioxide. And then from an environmental perspective, if you've got a manure pit located near a riverbank, which is often what happens since factory farms, of course, rely on a lot of water, then if it were to somehow breach, it could have an absolutely devastating effect on biodiversity downstream from that factory farm. And so there's a real good science-based reason for regulators in Asia to focus on the larger scale operations and deprioritize the smaller ones.
Thank you for answering that question. We do have another question that says, so dairy industry in India is one of the largest animal exploitator and is also pollution producer and is seen as one of the largest support for Indian economy as well because of the agri industry. And it's one of the 8th largest in India. So how do we tackle this in terms of Indian context?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, I've just been floored by how immense the scale of the milk production dairy sector is in India. I mean, it's more than 1 out of every 5 gallons of milk in the world is produced in India. So you're right, it's an absolutely enormous footprint. And there you also get to the question of marginalized communities, because my understanding is that there's at least 75,000 dairy farmers in India. These are ones that have only 1 or 2 cows or buffalo, and they are using it primarily for their home purposes. But I think this gets back to a recommendation that I made in my presentation, which is to make sure that we're holding the larger companies accountable for their practices, right? So about 15% of dairy in India is produced by 3 companies. And if there are campaigns focused on making sure that those companies' suppliers are following good animal welfare practices and good environmental practices, that's a way to have a ripple effect on the industry overall. We've always got to be pragmatic, in my vantage point, about how to maximize change for the benefit of animals.
Thank you. Yes. Very resonate with that answer very well. I do have another question which says, so are there any other reasons why, beyond the ones that you've stated, of course, in your presentation, are there any other particular reasons why you're so worried about the growth of factory farming in India?
Yes, I think part of it is because, the economy has obviously taken an extra special hit because of COVID. And I feel for all the pain and suffering that's happening in India right now and other parts of Asia that are experiencing a surge of new COVID cases. And that makes all the more reason that when the economic revival of India happens, there is a worry I have that there will be a real push for an expansion of export markets for things like beef. And so the companies that are going to be best positioned to really tap into those export markets are going to be the ones that essentially adopt a factory farm model. So that's one reason. The second reason is actually NRIs, non-resident Indians. They have a close ear of the current government, and there's a possibility that they can make the argument that, look, we need to open up the livestock sector to more foreign direct investment, which leads to an even greater expansion of existing factory and farm facilities. And the third reason is, of course, that there's a rise in the middle class and the upper middle class in India, and there is a rise in marketing towards those consumers. And I worry there that it will only fuel the growth of factory farming by those companies that are best positioned to essentially put out clever marketing that makes people think that they're buying good, sustainable milk or eggs, but it turns out that their practices are very damaging to animal welfare.
Yes, thank you for answering that. We just have 5 minutes and we'll have to close after that. But there is this question, I think you've talked about legislation, you've talked about different tactics of how to, deal with factory farming in India, how to, kind of mitigate this problem in the years to come. There's also this question that often comes in, it's one of my favorites as well. It's about how do we support then the alternative, the plant-based industry? How can we grow increasing support for it? And more so because it's usually seen as economically, you said that there is increasing population of middle class. For them, it's not as accessible. It's not that easy. So how do we tackle this?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think that I guess one simple way of answering that question is the notion of organic growth, which is who are the best positioned to help propagate the plant-based economy? It's animal rights activists. And I think that one of the things that's been heartwarming about the animal rights movement here in the United States is a very concerted sense of community. So even if we may be spread out across cities and states across the United States, there is a sense of community. And community gets built by, say, having these group dinners where people don't know anything about each other, but they're vegans, they love animals, and they come together and they meet at these different restaurants. And all of a sudden, it helps to improve the financial sustainability of these plant-based restaurants. And then those restaurants can advertise more. That brings in more customers, and you are enjoying something delicious, some roti with all plant-based food in it, and all of a sudden you're posting it on social media, and people who've never had plant-based food or don't have very much of it get enticed. They come to the restaurant. So my overarching suggestion is the notion of really leveraging the power of the animal rights activists to propagate the industry, the plant-based industry.
Thank you. That says that the onus lies with us.
Yes.
Yes. We are at 6 or 7, but there is this one small question you also mentioned in your presentation that you would like to bring up about right to farm or right to harm, how it has been one of those successful case studies. Can you please talk about it a bit more?
Absolutely, Sarita. This is perhaps the most important policy victory that we've had in the 37 years that my organization has been in existence. And the basic idea is that this law is called a right to farm law. And that in and of itself is a very problematic label. But because what it essentially would do is it would grant constitutional rights to factory farms in the Indiana Constitution. And if they have constitutional rights, that if there's any local government within Indiana that wants to enact something progressive for animal welfare or for the environment when it comes to these factory farms, it could be struck down in the courts as violating the constitutional rights of factory farm operations. So we pursued a multi-pronged effort to defeat that bill. And that really underscores that whatever campaign we're launching all across Asia, it's just so important that we pursue something that is truly multi-pronged, thinking through all the different audiences that we're trying to engage. And I would love to stay in touch with animal rights activists after this conference as well.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Thank you so much for all these answers, for sharing your knowledge, your expertise, and your guidance with us to help animals across the world, in Asia, everywhere. And over to the MC, we close this session with it.
Thank you so much, Sarita. You've been an absolutely fabulous moderator. And Jesse, wow, what a presentation and what wonderful answers, very insightful. And I'm sure it's got our audience really pepped up and they really want to get back to you with all kinds of things they could possibly do to further the cause of animal rights, animal welfare, and animal care. So a very big thank you to both of you, Sarita, once again, for moderating this session, and Jesse for the time, for the effort, and for that fantastic presentation. Stay well, stay happy, stay safe.